our discussion. We'll continue our discussion for part 3. And topics we have covered. In the past 2 sessions, we talked about what data privacy is, its importance, what are practice principles that can affect data privacy, and how to foster or enhance an organization culture of data privacy. We started discussing in part 1, data minimization strategies, security strategies, and how to implement those strategies. And in part 2, we discussed transparency in data collection and sharing the information in a consent form, such as the purpose for collecting data, how the data will be collected, stored, shared, and so forth, and how long it'll be shared, how long it'll be stored, and then how it will be destroyed. We also discuss the information and data that organizations retain and store, and how to create an inventory and map the inventory. And we ended with discussing roles and responsibilities in organizations and who has access to sensitive information. For today, we'll continue on looking at strategies in protecting personal information, and this includes data de-identification and suppression, data transfer, and data retention. And we noticed that there is greater concern among communities on the data that they share and how the data will be used. So there is great fear. And hence, we've tried to tailor these sessions to address and to think about how to implement strategies to protect sensitive information. So today, on successful completion, we hope that you'll be able to apply the knowledge and try de-identification and suppression methods for the data, and then to transfer data securely within and outside your organization, and to create a retention schedule for your organization. And now I'd like to invite Jen to talk about qualitative data de-identification. Jen, over to you.
Thank you, Swee-May. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. So I'm going to start by talking about qualitative data de-identification. And before we move to the next slide, I want to just give a brief reminder for people of what qualitative data is. So we often think about data in terms of numbers, which is quantitative data, but we use qualitative data as well, which is sort of narrative, people's words, right? The things that they say when we're interviewing people, when we're having a listening session. And so when we say qualitative data, we're referring to that narrative and word-based data. Okay, next slide. From the last training, you may remember this information, which I thought it would be important to review as we jump off here. So there is a difference between data that can directly identify a person or data that can indirectly identify a person. So on the left, you see direct identifiers are the ones that we can use by themselves without any other information to directly identify a person. So the person's full name or their social security number. Indirect identifiers cannot identify a person on their own, but they may be able to be used in combination with other data to identify a person. And so here's where we think about some of the general demographic data that we collect, such as date of birth, zip code, race or ethnicity, age groups, etc. Next slide. So there's some basic principles that I want to be sure to cover when we think about qualitative data de-identification. When we're working with qualitative data, recognizing the identifiable information can sometimes be straightforward. Like I said, if a person's name or address is contained in the data, it's identifiable. But there's another consideration for checking your qualitative data for potential to identify a participant or client. Sometimes this combination of indirect and direct identifiers can identify someone even if their name does not appear anywhere. This is most often the case when you're dealing with a small population, a close or tight-knit population, identity categories in your group of clients or participants that don't contain more than 10 to 20 people, so small groups of data. And this is also really critically important right now as many of you work with communities and individuals who are fearful for their safety and understandably reluctant to share their information. If we can explain how we will protect their qualitative data, that might help us in some cases. So we're going to go through a couple of scenarios, and I'm going to present a situation. I'm going to ask you to think about what problems might this situation present in terms of qualitative data de-identification. Next slide. So here's our first scenario. Angelo is the only taxi driver in a small town. In addition, he often transports his neighbors to health appointments for free when he is available. Angelo participates in a focus group, and he mentions, even without his name being used or recorded anywhere, that his experience driving people to and from appointments has allowed him to witness how many health facilities are not accessible to elderly people. You can advance the question. So let's think, what are you concerned about in this scenario with regard to Angelo's data privacy? You can write in the chat, or you can raise your hand and give us your idea. I'll give people a moment. Any ideas about what you're worried for Angelo? How might he be identified? Let's go on and talk about the discussion for this one, and then maybe people will have time to think about what we're talking about, what sort of things we're meaning for the second and third scenarios. So let's advance the slide to this discussion. So in this case, with Angelo, the taxi driver, someone reading this information, right, about how elderly people are not often able to enter facilities because they're not accessible. If they're reading this or reading even an unattributed quote that doesn't have Angelo's name or information on it, they may be able to guess that it is from Angelo, right? Because he's the only taxi driver in the town, and he is also really well known within the small community because of being a taxi driver, but also because he takes people to their appointments as a volunteer to help out. So how can we potentially address this data privacy issue? If we're working with information from focus groups, we can remove sections of Angelo's quotes that would serve to identify him. They can be bracketed, right, with generic information, like we could say, a middle-aged person from, tiny town, right? And you could just put in the name of like a bracket of a fake town name, right? Or some other bracketed fake information so that you are not revealing potentially information that would help people to identify Angelo. Or you can remove potentially identifying information altogether, so long as it doesn't significantly interfere with the meaning of the data. So being very careful about what pieces of the quotations you choose to report in a way, in a way that is public. You could also include Angelo's quotes or observations in a section of data that talks about access more broadly. So it doesn't just talk about transportation access, but we're talking about access to healthcare in general. If his quote was in there, we might not be able to know that it was about transportation in particular, and therefore his identity could be protected. Okay, let's try another one. In scenario 2, Xochitl is a medical interpreter in a medium-sized city. She interprets for Nahuatl speakers at their medical appointments, and Nahuatl is spoken by only about 35 people in this medium-sized city. So, what are you concerned about in this scenario? What might be the data privacy, the qualitative data privacy concern? Feel free to raise your hand or unmute and or write an idea in the chat. I'm expecting probably some of you have this sort of scenario, right? Where you're dealing with language groups that don't have a lot of speakers, even in the Seattle area or in Western Washington. Any questions or concerns about Xochitl's privacy? People are feeling quiet today. The patient's medical records. Thank you, Hannah. Right. In this case, she's interpreting for a medical appointment. And so she's going to hear things that are health related. And remember, we talked about how there are particular data privacy laws around health data. So that's something to consider. Anything else? Okay, great. Let's move on and talk about the discussion for this scenario. If Xochitl interprets for a client, it's likely she's going to know them, right? There are not that many Nahuatl speakers in the town. And in some cases, this might be an asset. In other situations, though, such as when a client is disclosing information about a stigmatized condition, such as maybe substance use or a mental health condition, Xochitl's presence at the appointment exposes the client to potential repercussions within her community. So, what are some ways that we can address this? Well, if possible, we don't want to use community members from very small language groups as interpreters for sensitive topics. If possible, we'd like to use phone interpreters or online resources. If this were a focus group scenario instead of a private medical appointment, you could rethink how to group individuals in the focus group or how to explain this possibility as part of your informed consent materials. Of course, we want to acknowledge that there are cultural considerations. Some people in different cultures feel more comfortable about sharing lots of information, while others are more private about certain topics or most topics. However, in addition to the clients and the community's cultural preferences, it is important to evaluate your project and be aware of any privacy regulations that would need to be upheld. Okay, last scenario. Sam is a Native Alaskan elder who agreed to be interviewed as part of a project on youth community engagement. In addition to the interview, researchers collected basic demographic information from each participant, such as age, race and ethnicity, and household size. So, what are you concerned about in terms of data privacy for Sam? Any ideas of what Sam's privacy, what pieces might be in danger here? Sometimes I wish there were like the three dots like you have on the phone when people are typing, so I know whether or not people are typing in the chat and need more time. Any ideas? Okay, let's go on and just discuss Sam's situation. So remember, this is about the indirect identifiers. The combination of those indirect identifiers could lead Sam to be placed in a category in which he is the only member, right? So Sam is older, he's a male, and he's an Alaskan Native, or he would be in the Alaskan Native American Indian category. What if the combination of people with those three characteristics is just one person? Well, now we'd be able to identify Sam, right? And so someone reading the quotes, say from a community elder, and then seeing only one person in the category of Native American, Native Alaskan, or one person in the category of over 75, they'd be able to guess that Sam participated because there's so few people who share those demographic characteristics. So what to do? Well, Swime is going to discuss this more in a moment, but one way we can address privacy for a situation like Sam's is to avoid reporting very small numbers in certain indirect identification categories. So it doesn't mean that we don't consider the data, but we don't report it publicly so that we can protect the privacy of the small number of individuals in that category. Sometimes we're also able to change the nature of the quotation or the narrative data we report in order to obscure the person's identity further if there's a concern they would be identifiable using their words plus the indirect identifiable categories reported elsewhere. Okay, so that's qualitative data. I'm going to put it back to Swime to talk about quantitative data de-identification.
Thank you, Jen. So Jen has described some of the ways to protect the identity of individuals and to protect their personal information. This is very much part of data privacy. And we know that, all organizations collect a combination of qualitative information and also quantitative information. So it is very important to think about ways along each step of the data collection process, the data analysis process, and reporting process, how we are safeguarding the information from individuals being able to figure out who is specifically referred to in the data. So protecting privacy and safeguarding the personal information. And now I'll focus on quantitative data. So we talked about data de-identification, as Jen has described, is removing or altering the information in order to make it more difficult or impossible for someone to be linked to the data. As she had mentioned with the scenario with Sam's situation, that there is, little nuances that we need to be aware of to protect the identity of specific individuals. When we talked about quantitative data, it would be any information or data that's related to numbers. How many, how much, how often are examples. So for example, how many people attend the counseling sessions that is offered by an organization, all these services, case management situations, and so forth. So think about numbers. And when we think about the information, often we collect personal identifying information. So such as age, name, and date of birth. And then when we try to de-identify the data, we move it along the spectrum of de-identification. And one of the steps is pseudonymous data. This is where all direct identifiers are removed. So any social security numbers, any names are completely removed and or transformed, but there are still indirect identifiers like, race, ethnicity, employment history, and zip codes. And as we move along this, we arrive at de-identified data, where both direct and known indirect identifiers are removed from the data so that there is no linkage to real-world identities. So think about the data or information that your organization collects and where it is on the spectrum. And after the information is analyzed, and we know that typically reports are generated to share the information, the results, the impact of the work that you're doing. This is where we use anonymous data. Information is aggregated and presented in charts and graphs and in other visual forms. One example of removing of identifiers or de-identification is the standard that is put out by the HIPAA privacy rule, and this is called the safe harbor method. This relates to personal health information, and it may not be relevant to the information that you collect. So this is a good standard to keep in mind. And here are the 18 identifiers that are removed or from the records. And something to take note, we do have geographic information, and for geographic information, as described by Jen just now, the size of the town, what is the population density? And in general, we have to modify the zip codes or the presentation of zip codes if the population size is below 20,000. Sometimes we aggregate the information across multiple smaller towns, and sometimes we only record or present the first 3 digits of the zip code. So something to consider and think about. And let's look at this example here. It was a survey that I conducted a while back, and I was interested in examining the relationship between sleep characteristics of pregnant individuals and their outcomes, birth outcomes. And also I was interested in the mental health characteristics of the individuals. So here we included giving individuals a study ID in the interviews, and there is also a medical record number, and that's age, gender, race, primary spoken language, zip code, and we also measure weight and height, and employment history, pregnancy history, other medical history, and then we determine the status of depression using patient health questionnaire, 9 questions, to determine depressive symptoms. And then we also measure sleep quality and quantity, and we collected blood samples to see if there is any chemical changes in the blood as a result of interrupted sleep quality and quantity. So with this data set that I have, what are some ways that I can protect the privacy of individuals? And I'd like for you to brainstorm with me on this. How can I protect the privacy of these individuals? Feel free to put it in the chat, raise your hand, unmute. We're a small group today, so I hope you feel comfortable just speaking in the group. And then we'll have an opportunity when Ashanafi discusses retention and data transfer for you to work in small groups. Any ideas that you'd like to share? Yes, thank you, Ilhan. Making the person anonymous. Yes. Do you have any suggestions for how to make the person anonymous? By not sharing this information? Thank you, Clara. Not putting names. Thank you. Yes. So the data set does not have names. However, we do have the medical record number. So with the medical record number, I can find out who the individual is. So in a situation like this, where I have multiple data sets, not only do I have the blood sample data, the survey or interview data, and I also have medical chart abstraction data. So the medical record number would help me link all this information into one huge database. So by not using names and by protecting the specific individual linkage, I have to make sure that I really protect the linkage file where the study ID and the medical record number is set aside away from the data, so that with the data sets, all there is just the study ID. So for the suggestions, that's correct. We want to make sure that there is no identifying information in the data set. And setting aside the linkage information and only accessible by certain individuals. All right, so think about it for your organizations and the information that you collect, whether it be quantitative or qualitative, what identifiers are or need to be altered or removed in your data sets. So another way to protect individuals is to do data suppression for quantitative data. And this refers to a process of withholding or removing selected information. And we do this in the reports and also in data sets. So this is to protect the privacy and to protect identities of individuals. So here's an example in a report that was submitted to the state legislature on birth volume and maternal health workforce in the state of Washington in 2025. So the state legislature was interested in understanding how many births occur in birth centers in the state of Washington. So this map shows the locations of birth centers. However, there is some data that is suppressed, meaning that we're not showing some data. So we can see that only birth centers with annual births of at least 10 are shown on the map. And typically for quantitative information, we put 10 as the cutoff. So if that particular field or category has less than 10, then we will not show that information to protect the privacy of individuals, right? So here's an example. And the second example is the workforce, number of midwives per 100,000 women of childbearing age. And here is by county, the number of midwives by county. And the gray shaded counties are counties without any midwives in 2021. And then there are some counties, the light blue, really light blue, where I've indicated 3 asterisks. And those are counties where the number of midwives per 100,000 women of childbearing age is less than 3. So we do show the data, like what Jen said. We show the data and we explain why we're not showing the numbers or the quantity. And for this table here, it's on race, ethnicity of all physicians and physicians who are OBGYN in the state of Washington in 2023. This is from a national database, and I obtained this data by querying the database. And these are the numbers I received by querying the race ethnicity distribution of OBGYNs in the state of Washington. And as you can see, there are 2 entries that are NA. And this is where the information is suppressed due to small numbers. So again, we show that we're not showing the exact number or the exact percentage. However, we're acknowledging that the numbers are low, and this has policy implications. All right. So data suppression allows us to protect the identities of individuals while at the same time allowing us to call out in the report of the low numbers and what policy implication that has. Okay. Any questions so far on data de-identification for both qualitative and quantitative data that applies to your situation? If you do have any, please feel free to put it in the chat. I'd like to now transition over to Ashanafi. And one reminder that Ashanafi, after part 2, we had a question on about how to password protect files and folders. So if there is time at the end of this session, Ashanafi will go through some of the steps on protecting files and like Word document, PDF, for your storage and transfer. And if we don't have time, we'll share the link to a document that has the steps. All right, on to you, Ashanafi.
Thank you, Sumi. Okay, so let's take a moment and reflect on what topics we covered. So far, we have been talking about collecting and storing data responsibly and safely. But when we asked you one question in particular, actually 2 questions, so you actually share information with different bodies, right? Or in these partners and vendors and within organization as well. So, and you also use different sorts of data sharing mechanism. So it means even if we have been taking care of data or collect data and store data responsibly, and we have been applying different data privacy mechanisms that we talked so far, like data minimization, data inventory and mapping, and the identification as well. But we also share with multiple bodies and partners using different methods. So that means we need to be intentional about how we transfer and share data. So in other terms, data privacy issues are not only assigned to data collection and storage, but they also apply to when we transfer and share data. So this topic will cover or will focus on how we move data between staff, partner, and vendors, and why that matters. And it's clear that when we send, upload, or email, text, or transfer data from place to place, or when we share it with colleagues or partners, we are introducing risk. So secure data transfer is essentially important to organizations because we all handle personal and sensitive data. And we want to make sure that the right person receives the right information, and we don't want our data or our emails or our whatever tools we are using, we don't want them to be intercepted, copied, or accessed by others. So there are 3 big reasons why we need to be very cautious of our data transfer and sharing. The very first one is it prevents data breach, and by doing so, we will prevent from losing sensitive information about our clients. And if we maintain or if we prevent the sensitive informations, that means we will keep or we will maintain our good relationship and we'll build trust with our clients. And if we have a good relationship with our clients, and partners and vendors also appreciate the fact that we have a very good or strong data stewardship, and this will help us to kind of comply with policy regulations like HIPAA, FERPA, or the State Privacy Acts. So the key point or the takeaway message is every transfer is a potential risk, and we need to secure any data before we share it with others. So before we talk about how to transfer data safely, we need to recognize the everyday risk, the things that we use to share information. These are not technical or abstract ways, right? We use them in our everyday activities. For example, email attachment. If the file isn't encrypted or if the email is not password protected, it can be intercepted or forwarded to others and simply sent to a wrong person. And once it is out, we know that we cannot put it back, right? So that's how many of you have sent email to a wrong person? I have received wrong sensitive information, including tax information from my coworkers. I have also shared information that was not meant to be sent to the people. So it's pretty common, all right? But if we make it protected, probably that we would decrease the harm associated with it. So another pretty common way we transfer data is using USB drives, right? They are easy, they are convenient and easy to transfer data, but they are also easy to lose, right? And they also are infected with malware, and they can carry malware from computer to computer as well, which could be problematic. Nowadays, pretty common, almost every day we use OpenShare links, and they are convenient, and they are very easy to use as well. But if they are not password protected, probably they are easy to kind of, if we share the link to a wrong person, a simple link can expose our data, and a data breach could happen simply. And another very important thing I want to make is, if we don't have an organizational safeguard or organizational like shared links like Google Drive or Shared Drive, and if we allow our employees to use their personal cloud or accounts to store data, when they leave the organization, we have no way to control their access to it. So we shouldn't allow personal cloud accounts to be used for organizational purposes. So so a file sent to a wrong email address exposed confidential client information. So we need to be careful about how we transfer our data. Now let's talk about how to actually transfer data more safely. So the first is password, right? This is clear. This is probably what we are all familiar about right? So we can create a password to any file. We can create a password to Word document if that's what you use, or we can create password to Excel or PowerPoint or PDF. So if you are sharing a document that contains client information, make sure that it has a strong password. What does a strong password mean? So in order to create strong password, we need the password should contain certain letters and possibly some numbers as well, and some probably maybe some figures, or most commonly we use exclamation mark, or we use like @ symbols, right? So we need to use different combination of words and letters and symbols in order to make it strong, and it should be long as well in order to be stronger. So one probably important habit when we write email is, even if the file is password protected, we shouldn't send the password with whomever we are sharing the password. We shouldn't send the password with the same email we are sharing the file, right? If we share the file and the password at the same time, that means if the email is intercepted, then we are giving everything away. But if we send the email with another channel, if possible, for example, if we can text the password to a receiver, or if we can give them a quick call and give them a password over the phone, then even if the email is intercepted, we'll be able to protect it. But if that's not possible, then we can send the password with another email. However, even if we created a password, we should know that it is not fully protected, right? If someone has access to our drive or server or our shared drives, and if somehow they can bypass our security, they can access the data or the information, right? So password protected doesn't necessarily mean it's highly protected, but it will prevent at least easily, it will not be easily accessible. So if we want to go a higher level of protection, we should encrypt our files. So encrypting a file might not be that hard, but we need to use kind of built-in systems. So for example, if we share our data with an organization, we can use SharePoints or OneDrive. So these are just built-in encrypted files. So we don't need to worry about it if we are using this clouds. But for small files, like if we are going to share with partners, we can use zip. We can zip our folder and we can add a password as well. So I will try to show how to create password in documents, but for encryption, I have attached some YouTube videos, and you can probably look at it. So to the right of this slide, if you see, there are certain things that we shouldn't do and we should do. And when we are doing our organization activities, we shouldn't try to use personal emails like Gmail or Yahoo, and we should avoid using public Wi-Fi. But if possible, we should use organizational approved storage and communication tools, like if we have OneDrive or others we should use, and we should apply multi-factor authentication when it is applicable. Okay, so in order to make our data transfer methods secure, all we have to do is just add a password protection, and encrypt the data, and avoid using personal emails and public Wi-Fi, and use double authentication. So this could be pretty easy, right? In particular, if we are committed, if we can apply this one in our organization and we have control over it. However, if we are working in collaboration with other agencies and partners, well, we have no control over their organization, right? So how can we prevent, or how can we secure our data once it gets somewhere, right? So we collaborate with partners and agents. We want to ensure that the data we work hard to protect stays protected once it leaves, or it reaches somewhere out of our hands. So privacy should not be lost in collaboration. We want the same level of care and safeguard to continue wherever the data arrives. So what shall we do, right? So if we are working with others, we need to share only data that is truly necessary, or we should give them only what is required to deliver service and meet a reporting requirement. And when possible, we need to de-identify, like Suime and Jen said earlier, we need to identify, or we need to anonymize data before we share, so that we are not sharing people, but patterns or trends of information. Then by sharing, we need to make sure that partners have the same level of security, if not more, stronger than ours. More importantly, we need to have a data sharing agreement. So what does we mean when we say data sharing agreement? We mean we need to have a document that states how data will be used, who will use the data, who will access it, and how it must be reported. So when we work with others, we need to share a minimum data, we need to anonymize it, and we need to make sure that they have a the same level or stronger level of security, and we need to have a data sharing agreement. So what is data sharing agreement? So data sharing agreement is simply a formal contract that explains how and why data will be used and shared between organizations. Its purpose is to make sure everyone understands what data is being shared, why it is needed, and how it will be protected. So there are a good data sharing, or a strong data sharing agreement has 4 components, or it describes 4 important points. The first is purpose and scope. So it means it will describe what data is being shared and for what reason. And the second is it will describe how long the data will be kept, and the destruction policy as well, which we call a data retention. We are going to talk about it soon. And the third point is, or the third point, thing that will describe is responsibility. Who is responsible for protecting it, and what security standards apply for each data type. The fourth content that we expect from data sharing agreement is compliance clauses, like which law or policies must be followed and what happens if there is a breach. So in short, the data sharing agreement protects both organization that sends or shares the data and that receives the data as well, if it is implemented well. So here we are now going to move into breakout rooms for a short group activity. So what we are going to do is we will discuss on this short example of data sharing agreement clause. as you can see here under the red box. So your task is to review it together and look for gaps or weak points in how privacy is being protected. And your group discuss those 3 questions. There are 3 questions below the red box, right? What privacy or compliance gap do you notice? Which part of the data sharing agreement need to be clearer or more specific? And how could we strengthen the clause around data protection? So you don't need to write it perfectly, or just identify what is missing and what should be improved. And you will have about 8 points in breakout rooms. And please nominate one person who can share the key insights discussed in your group with us when we come back, and we will give you 8 minutes. Well, before we go to the breakout sessions or rooms, is there any question? Okay, so we can go to the breakout session.
Okay, I'm going to create the
Share. We can share what privacy or compliance gaps do you notice from this clause?
I'll share a little bit, see,
Okay,
with
sure,
my group.
please.
Well, we, my group, we all agree that when it's funders propose to share, we usually not put, when we going to share some information for funders purpose, we not put names. I mean,
Okay.
we put names, but we don't put last names.
Okay.
We don't put zip codes. And we make an agreement of what we exactly put, and put the numbers only for our reports.
Okay,
Don't know if I understand the question, but
yeah, thanks for sharing, Claire. So that this you are trying to de-identify and to minimize the data as much as possible. That's a good practice. Okay, thanks for sharing that. Now, okay, from previous slide, I tried to show like we can create password, or we can encrypt our files, but if we work with other organizations, then we have to expect the same standard from other partners as well. And we need to in order to do that, we need to develop data sharing agreement, and the data sharing agreement should incorporate like what's the purpose and the scope of the data sharing agreement, what's the data retention data and responsibilities and compliance clauses. And this, if we draft this clause as our data sharing agreement, so what are the privacy or compliance gaps in this clause? That's one. And which part of data sharing agreement need to be clearer or more specific in terms of, that means in this clause, what do you expect to be more clearer or more specific in terms of data sharing agreement? In other terms, in order to include those information. So how could we strengthen the clause around data protection? Okay, so who else would like to share what the
I can share.
Okay.
Connie Fong from CISC. Sorry, I just joined in the breakout room, but I did like discuss with my my staff in the breakout room. We noticed that this agreement is too general. We will be more focused on, like, when you say like report purpose, is which report to purpose, and what kind of services history, and how, because you cannot, it's kind of weird to write down like data will be kept as long as needed. For me, I will be more specific, like the period of time, and also I will add some of the some of the sentences will say, if organization A want to stop the sharing, what kind of like process they need to do. Like organization A will be written format to organization B before like 30 days, that kind of stuff, to be more specific.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Connie. Okay, that's pretty much everything. Okay, thank you. So yeah, thanks for sharing. I'm gonna just proceed to the next slide to show you what was missed. So the common weakness, as Connie said, is that there is no clear purpose, or the purpose was not clearly described. So as long as needed is vague, it's not specific enough. So it must specify the purpose in a specific terms. Another point that it misses is there is no information about data retention. So there is no data retention timeline and destruction policy. What will happen after, when will the data period end, or the life cycle? So are they going to keep it for lifetime, or are they going to destruct it? How are they going to destruct it? It was supposed to be specified, and no mention of encryption or breach notification or confidentiality requirements. What will happen? How are they going to protect the data? Or what will happen if data breach happens? Or when are they going to notify you? Who is responsible? Nothing mentioned about it. And personal identifier information are not anonymized, because it says well, some data includes client names and address will be shared, but we believe that when we share data, we need to anonymize or minimize the personal identified information as much as possible. So this is a very poor clause for data sharing agreement. So let's see what does a strong clause look like. Okay, so we can improve the previous clause by like this one. In this case, okay, I want to give you 30 seconds to read it. No, okay, this one, sorry. Okay, so this clause, as you can see, is very complete. It has the purpose, and it excludes, it specify, identify, explains about the identification, that it will not have names, address, and phone numbers, and it can only serve for a certain purpose, like service level information are going to be provided, and the purpose is for program evaluation and reporting, and the organization be agrees to maintain encryption in transit and rest, and there is data privacy at the store, right? Data will be retained for a maximum of 12 months, this is data retention, and it will be permanently deleted thereafter. In the event of a security breach, the organization B is responsible to let the organization A know within 48 hours and take corrective actions to mitigate the further risk. So this is pretty strong and complete clause, and our data sharing agreement should be this strong. Okay, so to summarize about data sharing and transferring sharing, in order to have a very strong data sharing and data transfer and sharing practice, or we need to have is we need to use secure tools, protect files with password or encryption. So we can create password to our documents and to our folders and to our computers as well, and we can encrypt them to further strengthen the security level of our documents. And when we share or when we work with other agents and partners, or even including vendors, probably we can have data sharing agreements to clarify purpose, retention, and security responsibilities. And always when it's possible, we need to share the minimum necessary data. Particularly, we need to anonymize or de-identify. So if we do password protection, or if we apply encryption and have data sharing agreement, so our data transfer could be consider as strong and secure. So this is all about data sharing and transfer. Now we are gonna go to data retention. So data retention simply means how long we can keep different types of data records and why we need to keep those data records for a specific period of time. So even if we collect different types of data at the same time, we are not supposed to keep them all for the same period of time. So there are certain specific time periods defined or required by the vendor, by vendors and other agencies we work with, that they specify for how long it should be maintained. So we touched on data minimization last week, and the week before. Data retention is the other side of it. And once we have data, we need to store it securely for appropriate amount of time, and then dispose or delete or discard it safely when it is not longer needed. And data retention talks about for how long we are gonna keep it and how we are gonna dispose data when we don't need it. Okay, so let's define what does data retention policy mean. So it's a written framework that outlines how long data is kept, where it is stored, and who can access it, and when it is securely deleted. So in other terms, data retention policy is really simple, right? It includes how long data we can keep for how long we can keep information, where it is stored, and who is allowed to see it, and when do we securely delete it. So the goal here is to keep information only for as long as it is truly needed. So for data sharing, the data transfer and sharing, we said the goal is to get the right the right data to the right person, but here the information is to keep information only for as long as it is truly needed. So keep data longer than necessary increase risk, and we don't want to expand that one. And the purpose of data retention policy is to increase compliance, to decrease risk, and to increase efficiency, demonstrate accountability, and build trust with commit server, and to fulfill vendor and state agency requirements. So let's see how are we gonna develop, or what are the components of data retention policy. So we can divide them into 5 or 6 components, but the last one, the sixth one, can be categorized in 1 or into 2 if you want, but let's see one by one. So the first one is data identification and classification. Last week, if you remember, if some of you who attended last week's session, we talked about data inventory and mapping. In data inventory, the first step was to data identification, and the second was data classification, including to data mapping. So we need to identify and classify data based on type, based on sensitivity. Yes.
Could I just stop you? I think you're showing the slide on the Washington State legal landscape. Okay.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Okay. So different law. Okay. So this is a law, legal landscapes or laws in Washington State. So different laws and contracts can apply at the same time. There are different laws, obviously, and so different laws can have different time period or limitations. So when we are encountered with different laws, we always follow the rule that is most protective and that requires longest retention. For example, if you have personal data, and if one of the laws says 6 years and the other says 5 years, you need to retain it for 6 years, because that we need to follow the maximum one. So sorry, I thought I shared this one. So the key component of data retention, it shows 2 slides. Okay, so there are 5 components here, but the 6th one can be divided into 2. We can divide it into assigning responsible personnel and regular policy review. And but let's see just one by one. And last week we talked about data inventory and data mapping. When we talk about data inventory and mapping, the first activity was to identify data and to classify them based on type and sensitivity and importance. For example, we can classify data into high sensitive, medium sensitive, and low sensitive, and we can also classify them into critical or very important, high importance, medium importance, low importance. Then once we classify those data into identify and classify the data, then we will need to define or establish a specific time frame for keeping each category of information. In other terms, we will need to define how long we are going to retain them. And then we need to specify storage standards. We talked about this when we talked about last week when we talked about data inventory as well. Then we need to specify what disposal procedures we are going to follow in order to delete or destroy them in our end. And the next step is to assign responsibility or a responsible personnel for each activity and for each data type. And the last one will be to review our policy regularly. And we are gonna see one by one here. Okay. So these are the 6 steps I said earlier, and they mix if we draft our data retention policy clearly, it will make life easier for everyone who participates in to make an informed decision. So the first step is to identify any classified data, and this is for a slide from last week. And last week we tried to identify any classified data based on sensitivity level and importance, and this is how we classify them. So this is in other terms, the data retention policy can be a continuation of data inventory and mapping. And once we have this, the next step will be to kind of define for how long we are going to keep them. And for example, here we have a category client data. So most policies recommend from 6 to 10 years to retain them for 6 to 10 years. Often they have to be deleted after 10 years. And we need to specify the exact law that requires how long we need to retain. And financial data usually are retained for 7 years because that's required by IRS. And after 7 years, we need to delete it, and we need to specify in the later steps, we need to specify what are the methods we need to use to delete it. And the same for staff, program data, and communication. So once we classify and identify data, we need to have another column that shows for how long we are going to retain them. That will show us the retention period. So the next step will be, for example, here, again, when we decide the retention period, we need to consider the vendor and legal counsel, right? So each legal vendor and legal counsel, they have their own requirement and specification, and we need to follow those. And for example, King County requires a certain level, and this is the contract requirement for King County, and it reads as follows: the contractor shall maintain the following for a period of 6 years after termination of this contract: accounts and records, including personal property, financial, programmatic records, and other such records the county may deem necessary to ensure proper accounting and compliance with this contract. What this means for your organization is records must be stored securely for about 6 years after contract ended, and it applies to personal, financial, program, and property-related records. And records must remain accessible in case of audit, monitoring, or reporting requests. And after retention period, records should be securely destroyed or deleted when as necessary. Okay. So here the key point is to align your internal data retention policy with vendor-specific requirement to ensure compliance. So every time we decide the retention period, we need to always align with the policy, the vendor policy or requirements. Okay, so the next step is to plan how to securely dispose or destroy data. So there are different ways or mechanisms we can apply. For example, for a physical record, for example, if we have a hard copy like paper or files, then we need to shred them. And we may need to use a very secure way to shred them or destroy them. And if we have digital records, we might have to use certain like this DoD or Department of Defense approved software, or we need to delete all the backups, permanently remove cloud files, revoke all access permissions. So we need to make sure that it's not gonna be recovered again when we delete them. Or if we are gonna use a third party disposal mechanism, then we need to get a certificate of verification. And this is the third step in data retention policy. So we need to decide ways of data deletion or destroying in our plans. So the next component is or the next component of data retention policy is assigning roles and responsibilities. So assigning roles and responsibilities should be based on each person's job function or qualification, and each organization may structure this differently, but here is an example for my hypothetical example. So you can executive director, what is the role of the executive director, the IT personnel, program manager, and all staff, what they are required and what is the responsibility can be mentioned here. So what matters is applying the access control principles like what we talked last week, need to know and least privilege principles, and use role-based access as we discussed last week, okay? So data retention is part of respecting privacy. We keep only what we need and for as long as we need it, and we explain that clearly to the people we serve. And we need to be transparent, and we need to have constant alignment as well. So here is policy review and auditing. This is the last but not the least component of data retention, and policy shouldn't just sit on a shelf. That means it should be updated and reviewed continuously. Retention practices need to be reviewed regularly. A yearly review makes sure our policy still fits current laws and program needs, and we document what we keep, what we delete, and why, so there is a clear record. We also watch for any changes in state or further requirements, and we run internal audits to confirm we are actually doing what the policy says. This keeps our data practice reliable, accountable, and up to date. So just bring it all together, all the steps, 6 steps. Okay, what we have to do is here, we need to identify and classify our data, as we said earlier. So just assume this is a continuation of the previous table. So here we have data type, and the retention period will be specified here. As you can see, for different data types, we have different retention period, and we need to specify responsible body. That, in other terms, we need to assign personnel here, responsible personnel in our organization. For example, it could be the program director for one, program privacy officer, or financial manager, and others based on their role. And then finally, we need to specify the disposal method, like shared papers, permanently deleting electronic copies, and others should be specifically described according to what we can and what we have in our disposal. So as we wrap up, here is a quick checklist to remember. Make sure your retention policy is written down, staffs are trained on it, and your retention schedule is current, and you have secure process for disposing data when it is no longer needed. These resources can be, here are on the right, you have resources you can use to kind of determine the data retention period for it. So your retention schedule should be living document. That's something that I want to emphasize. It's not static. Once you've done it, it doesn't mean it's okay forever. So it has to be reviewed every year. It has to be updated. So and then we can remain relevant, or it can remain relevant and useful for a long time. Okay, so I have example data retention example document and a template, and I want to show you the one. Okay.
I have a question I want to ask you
Okay.
is there's a slide you said that we can like paper copy to store it in the cabinet, and for like some data we save it on the like hard drive or soft like cloud or something. I just want to know, is it safe to save soft copy in the cloud? Because like like most of the contract you say that you have to like keep it for like 7 years or like 6 years. That's a lot of paper, I was thinking, can we like scan it over and then like save it in the OneDrive or cloud? Is that safe to do it that way, or actually it's better to keep the paper?
Well, if you are gonna use Google Drive, or like if you have organizational accounts, that's probably the safest because it is encrypted by default. And when you share, if you apply a password as well, that's gonna be the safest than the having a hard copy. But if that is personal account, then it probably is better to keep it as a paper, but you need to secure that file for that file place. For if you use file cabinet, probably you need to lock it. Okay.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And
So
fireproof also. If you lock things in a cabinet, then the cabinet is fireproof. So you still
okay.
have access to it.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so this is I found it from one organization called SecureFrame, and I had to subscribe by my email to access this one. So you are looking at this one, right? Okay, so they have data retention policy. As you can see, there are about they divide the components of data retention policy into 8. They have purpose and scope, data retention, storage, and other things. But well, you can use this kind of a template if you want, or you can modify it based to your organization. So I will show you this structure, and then I will show you an example I prepared for my hypothetical example organization. So here you have, there is a purpose and scope. So they try to specify to use certain language to describe in detail the purpose and scope of the data sharing agreement. And the next, they have data retention and storage, and they have primary account number and masking. This is probably then the quarterly data review policy, data disposal, and they have exceptions. Well, this is just for any this may not be applied for may not apply for everybody. So they have enforcement, and they have responsibility review and audit sections as well. So there are, you can use templates kind of created by different organizations if you are interested, or you can develop your own. So well, the reason why I share this is I just want to show you that there are tools online if you want to access them. And okay, I'm aware time is not there. Okay, so okay, I don't know what I shared here. Okay, so, do you see Kara Social Service?
Yes.
Okay, so we have shared this. I think you will get this one. So based on the contents or the steps that with the components we talked earlier, we have purpose and scope in the first one. That we have policy reviews, the policies that we will implement. Then we have retention schedule. So this is a table I showed you earlier. So we can create this one, and we have data storage and the type of data that can be stored in the organization, on the cloud and third-party system, and data disposal mechanisms are specified. So we classify data into sensitivity and priority and type, and we have assigned responsibilities to executive director, data steward or IT person, program lead, and all stuff, legal and regulatory references. And anyway, so we have tried to create a sample and which you can follow or adapt to your organization. And I hope that this will help you to kind of develop your own data retention policy in your organization. Okay, I think that's pretty much for today. I was planning to demonstrate how to create password for documents and PDF, but it seems that we don't have time. But we have attached a link. If you are interested, it shows step-by-step guide, and there are also YouTube videos. However, if after you use those links and watch those videos, if it's not still clear, we'll be happy to meet with you one-to-one and show you how to create a password for your documents and folders as well. And we can also show you how to create a password for your emails. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashanafi, for bringing us to a close today. There is definitely a lot of information that we have shared and that you have gleaned over these past 3 sessions. So we will share the information like the handout that Ashanafi shared just now. We will share it with you, and also the document that shows steps on creating password protect documents and so forth. And also the slides and the recording. And I've just put the link for the evaluation, and please give us your feedback and also reach out to BSK Stefan for assistance if you need more capacity building support related to data privacy. And you may also send us an email at askdicentra@gmail.com, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. And we'll stick around for a few minutes if you have additional questions that you'd like to share at this point.